For Martin Luther King, winning the world's most respectable prize, the Nobel, did not mean he was about to retire to the life of an elder statesman. In 1964, for the first time, King experienced violence directed against him by blacks, as he had many times by whites. During an appearance in Harlem, he was assaulted by black Muslims, though King realized consensus in the movement would be increasingly difficult to achieve. He pressed on with his program of civil disobedience, peaceful resistance, and what he called non-cooperation with evil. And where many of the more militant factions were speaking of whites as the enemy, King repeatedly insisted that the brotherhood of man transcended all races, religions, political, social, and economic differences. After passage of the Civil Rights Act, King's next major objective was the achievement of full voting rights. Many whites were frightened at the prospect of the black majority voting sympathetic leaders into office. An attempted march from Selma to Montgomery was met with massive police resistance, arrests, violence, and the murder of a white clergyman. Finally, under federal protection, the march was able to proceed over 5 days to the Alabama state capitol. There, King told tens of thousands of supporters that the battle is in our hands. The march gave much-needed support to President Johnson's push for voting rights legislation. At last, on August 6, 1965, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law. Another fundamental right guaranteed by the Constitution was at last won by America's African-American citizens. With the passage of the Voting Rights Act, Martin Luther King's struggle had achieved its last great success. From this time forth, he would broaden his focus to include issues of poverty, employment, and peace throughout the United States and the world. In early 1966, Dr. King began a major action in Chicago. There, he moved into a slum dwelling with the intention of organizing the poor. This was a courageous and controversial effort for King and Southern leaders who were focusing on the North for the first time. Later that same year, Los Angeles was shattered by the Watts riots. In 5 days of violence, 34 people were killed and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of property was destroyed. The nation seemed on the verge of insurrection. Perhaps peace was impossible in the United States, while we had 500,000 troops fighting in Vietnam. In this turbulent social and political climate, King realized he could no longer remain silent on the war. Despite the council of major advisors who warned that voicing opposition to the war would alienate some of the civil rights movement's strongest allies, King spoke out powerfully against America's involvement in Vietnam. Martin Luther King was arguably the most important and effective American leader to take a moral stand against our involvement in Vietnam. On April 3rd, he delivered a speech that made reference to the war abroad and the war at home in the same terms. Men for years now have been talking about war and peace, but now no longer can they just talk about it. It is no longer a choice between violence and nonviolence in this world. It's nonviolence or non-existence. On April 4th, 1968, Dr. King stepped out onto the balcony of his motel room in Memphis, where he had been meeting with Ralph Abernathy, Jesse Jackson, and others. From across the way, a single shot was fired. Martin Luther King fell dead, murdered at the age of 39. James Earl Ray was convicted of the murder of Martin Luther King. King was a man with extraordinary gifts. A dreamer with a vision of equality he shared so generously for the good of humanity. A hero of magnificent courage, eloquence, and inspiration. A father of 4 young children, a leader with a lifetime of yet untapped potential.
We will be the participants in a great building process that will make America a new nation. We will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. This is our challenge. This is the way we must grapple with this dilemma. We will be a great people. Let us have faith in the future. I know it's dark sometimes. And I know all of us begin to ask, how long will we have to live with this sister? I know all of us are asking, how long will prejudice blind divisions of men, darken their understanding, and drive bright-eyed wisdom from her sacred throne? When will wounded justice, lying prostrate on the streets of our cities, be lifted from this dust of shame to reign supreme among the children of men? Yes, when will the radiant star of hope be plunged against the nocturnal bosom of this lonely night?